kind of beat it down here with your camera, which is still kind of, you're not sure about. And then you look back and say, holy shit, where'd they go? You know? Ready, go! I read it some time ago, and I just liked it a lot. I thought this would be fun to make a movie out of it, though it would be very ambitious to make a movie out of. And then it turned out that DreamWorks had bought the property. So I kind of forgot about it a while, though I did mention to Steven Spielberg that I did like the property very much. And just left it hang in the air like that. Now Tokyo Rose is talking about missing girlfriends and loved ones and et cetera.
And then I recall we were at the Governor's Ball at the Academy Awards in 2004 after Mystic River had been nominated. And Steven came over to our table, and Clint and he were talking for quite a while off to the side. And the following week, Clint came into my office. We were in pre-production on $1 Million Baby, and he had said that Steven had offered him the project to direct. I remember he had this big grin on his face. He says, it's big, it's really big. And I said, well, we can do big, we can do big. So that was how it first came together, and we just started working on it while we were still working on $1 Million Baby. But James hadn't had a lot of experience with the filmmaking process, and so I don't think he really knew quite what to expect. And at first he was a little bit cautious with us as to what we'd be doing with the story of his father, and I'm quite certain he felt he was in good hands with Steven Spielberg producing and Clint Eastwood directing. I know he felt like, you know, he had hit the jackpot there, but still he was a little concerned as to what we'd do with the story. He read the script and was very pleased, and he came in and he sat down, and in classic James Bradley form, he just proceeded to conduct a lecture for at least an hour and a half, and it was moving. He's so passionate about the story, and we didn't have to ask but maybe 3 questions the whole time. He just told us everything we needed to know to make this movie.
And so we just pick him up this way, bring it into the
On this one here, we'll just go with his face. Yeah.
All of us that have worked with Clint for a while have just gained his trust somehow. All of us started in a position where we could prove ourselves to him, and then were given the opportunity to move up. I started as an assistant director. Tom Stern started as his lighting gaffer, and the only exception maybe would be Henry Bumstead, who was pretty well established by the time he started working regularly with Clint. And it was just sort of understood that once you'd done a project with Clint, if he was happy with your work, you were the guy until you turned it down.
I was given the script probably a month or 2 after I'd read the book, and was quite taken with it. And then I was doing another film called Last Kiss with Tony Goldwyn. He gave me a present, which was a series of photo annuals from the war years. It proved to be absolutely invaluable in terms of kind of imagery and visual idiom and things like that. And Clint's real succinct. I was once quoted in the New York Times as saying he's the most articulate, totally nonverbal person I'd ever met. That was a long time ago. I think it holds true. So we've been working together since '81, so I can read him pretty well, and we just sort of go back and forth about what we're thinking. But I think the prime thing about Clint is, if you think of that term plastic arts, in plastic not meaning like Tupperware, but malleable, that Clint likes to leave things plastic until the very last possible moment.
Well, the script calls for 3 of them, right? So we'll do 3 of them. But these can be changed. Roll sound, please.
Safety's off.
Light him if you got it.
The trick about this movie for me, I think, is to make it like a personal epic as opposed to an epic. So there's sort of moments where there are visual opportunities to really kind of let it out. And for the most part, when I'm thinking about it, we always try to see it through the eyes of the character rather than just some big crane shot or something like that. That's maybe an objective shot rather than a subjective shot. Or we'll start with a sort of a subjective shot, and then it becomes an objective shot. And with 4 to 8 of those moments in the film, it sort of gives you enough context to the scope of World War II and what these characters were doing.
Doc! Get the hell in here! Doc! You start with the script, and you can't go anywhere without a script. But the last write of the script is the editing. And I think what editing is trying to take the audience for this ride with the characters and to make it as seamless. They say, what's a good edit? And an edit you didn't see. It just flows together, and you're drawn into the story that you don't even see those edits happen. You're so involved in the story, and that's what I think was a good film. Because not only do we have those action scenes, but we have these very dramatic scenes in it. And so you're taking the audience from this, guns and things blazing and explosions and everything going on to also it's a somber moment. And the first cut, it was an epic. Because I'm an editor that believes that whatever the director shoots, to my best of my ability, I use all the film. Now, is it going to be long? Absolutely. But does the director get to see everything he shot? Yes.
Okay, guys. Who wants to be famous?
From the beginning, it was Clint's idea not to find big-name stars as much as he just wanted really good actors that fit the part as best we could find. And age was a consideration. He really wanted to try and keep people as young as possible, and yet they needed to be able to carry off these dramatic scenes. But casting was in good hands with Phyllis Huffman back in New York and in LA, where she'd moved back and forth. She had her work cut out for her on this project because we had well over 100 roles to cast. And I think she saw every young actor in New York and Hollywood. Every single one seemed to come through the doors to read for a part.
I went in 2 or 3 times with Phyllis Huffman, who is, pretty much the best at what she does. Just a great person, very warm and engaging person, makes you feel comfortable. The auditions are probably the worst part of our job as actors, and she makes it very comfortable.
Ira, they're cops. They're supposed to have nightsticks. You're not supposed to be in the street swinging a chair.
Since it's a historical piece, there's a lot of research that has to be done. And first of all, we look at the pictures, and most of the times we try to recreate what we see. And I think before the movie is completed, we will have dressed almost 10,000 as far as background and principals. So it's quite a big show. It was probably around a 3 or 4 month prep to get everything together, and we needed all that time. It was a long process.
Action!
And with the Marines, they have their HBTs, and that's what they basically fight in. And then we did have to make the HBTs because there were so many of them. At many times we had to fit like over 500. So we had to get the fabric, find the fabric, the twill that they really don't make anymore. And then we had to dye it, and then we had to age it, so it was a long process.
Next command, nobody leaves this ramp until you hear the ramp is clear. That's your signal to say, follow me, you got that?
We needed a military technical advisor for this project. And Clint actually had worked with somebody in the past on Heartbreak Ridge. And at the time, the guy was a Marine at the base where he was filming the movie. And the gentleman, Jim Deaver, decided at that point that that's what he wanted to do after he got out of the military service, was become a military technical advisor. And he'd been doing that for the last 15 years or so.
Spread it out so I can get a good run through to the smoke on the camera, okay? You stay right there, spread it out all the way down.
We do the research of that time period, and for Flags of Our Fathers, it's, for EWO, the 28th Marines, 2nd Battalion. So we make sure that all the uniforms, the equipment, we work hand in hand with the props, wardrobe, And with the special effects, make sure for the explosions and the weapons, make sure that's the proper weapons for each individual to carry going with his equipment.
Yeah, so it's like the ante-room to the dining room. Right. Yeah, that's brilliant.
We're one of the first ones to get a script. I think maybe I had the second or third script on Flags of Our Fathers. And so I read it and think about where different things should be and start looking for locations, trying to keep everything together close by so you have a full day's work one area and a full day's work the other area. So it's a big job. I have location scouts too that help me, and they may look at 5 or 6 places and then they show them to me, and then I pick the ones that I think maybe I'd like to use or just to show Clint.
Action!
We found as many of the locations as possible just to give it the proper scope. We went to Washington, actually, technically we went to Arlington, Virginia, and shot at the memorial there. And we went to Chicago for Soldier Field and for a few other locations that looked like the Midwest. We went to Texas to shoot on the USS Texas, and then all over California for the right looks, that we could find places that represented other parts of the country.
Had this one ship that they have down in Long Beach, which is in really good shape. These guys have kept it in terrific shape. It's kind of a hobby, I guess. They conduct tours on it, but it was very, very good shape for filming. And we just had to put things back to the way they were in World War II. They were very exacting, the art department.
So many sets and all over town and out to the desert and airports and this and that, and it's really, really kept me busy, really too busy.
The biggest challenge we had was Iwo Jima, finding some place we could stage that battle, because that location was so unique. We went to Iwo Jima, Clint and I did, back in April of 2005, and got a look at the beach, and we'd done our research and we knew what we were up against, and we needed a black sand beach that had to be, you know, of a significant scale. The beach there is 3.5 miles long, and it's got some dimension. It's got a bank and a real absence of vegetation. So we started looking for a black sand beach that fit those characteristics, and everybody and their uncle had a suggestion. And Kokai Ampaz, our location manager, sort of shared some research photos with a bunch of film commissions, and these two fellows from Iceland came up with pictures that were amazing. My first question was, can people get in the water in Iceland, because we need to do that, and they said, oh, absolutely, the summer months are beautiful there, and you'll love it. That was a bit of a sales job. Icelanders didn't mind getting in the water, but it was still awfully cold.
Iceland sounds like an odd choice, but it isn't. It's a geothermal volcanic island, much like Iwo is. It's got all pure black sand, like Iwo has. It's very much the same. They're in different meridians, but it's like we were filming in Iceland in August, and the battle for Iwo Jima took place on February 19th. Started on February 19th, 1945. So August in Iceland is kind of like Iwo in February.
The continental drift between continents, between the European and the American continents, meet right in Iceland. And Iceland, being a volcanic island, has a split down the middle, and where Sandvik Beach is, it's the split, which forms a swale. So there was a tremendous amount and deposit of black sand that we could kind of mine, and we spent almost 2 weeks knocking down the existing sand dunes, as well as bringing in, like I say, almost 1.5 million cubic yards of black sand and regrading it to create the berm that was at Iwo. We stacked sand about 14 or 15 feet high for 250 yards to create a plateau that recreated the landing plateau that the U.S. Marines met when they were on Iwo.
I had a 3-man team in Iceland. Myself, there was Mess Sergeant Mender and Gunnery Sergeant Williams. We had training with the background 500 for 2 days, showing them how to do tactics. Because in Iceland, they don't have weapons. They don't even see that much American movies. So we had to teach them of that time period of how to carry the gear, how to fire a weapon, and how to move with the rifle of the World War II. We had training with the actors. We showed them the tactics of each individual, from officers, how they take charge, and what kind of formations. And then we worked with them every day on the set. They have questions. So great, they're like sponges. They want to ask all questions. They want all the information they could get, because they want to represent their character the best of their ability. And they want to learn a lot about the individual, and they really get into it. They want to make sure they get it right, because they're proud to play the character or the individual they're doing in this movie.
I come from a family with a pretty deep military history. My father was in the Navy during Vietnam, and both my grandfathers fought in World War II. My grandfather was my idol growing up, the one who fought in Germany and was actually decorated as a soldier in the Army. And to do this and pay respect to him and to the men of his generation is a huge, huge responsibility, and also a huge honor in a lot of ways.
I was raised by a drill sergeant, so this stuff's in my blood. And coupled with Clint Eastwood, I just about lost my mind. And so I called my representatives. I called them back. I said, you better get me this movie. You guys are fired. And I found out that the big roles were gone. I said, you don't understand. I don't care if I'm only working 2 days. I want a part in that movie.
I think that it was kind of Clint's idea from the beginning to have it be very much like it would be on the battlefield. All of these young men just sort of thrown into uniform and thrown onto this island and be ambushed as they were. Just the chaos and the confusion and the emotions that would arise just organically in a situation like that.
Our hearts would be beating. I know mine. I mean, after we would run, 30 yards across the battlefield with so much going on and gunfire, literally 100, 200 guns firing at once, and you can't help but be affected by that environment. I don't know, there's something, so obviously sort of male or macho about it to some extent, but it also, you feel like boys, and these were boys, and we kind of connected on that level.
Action! And there's a secret code that I'd come to find later, that all these Marines had. If you were on the rock, if you did EWO, you didn't even need to say it. The guys would just show each other, they'd just show their elbow. Because their elbows are all gouged out from crawling, doing the military crawl on all this lava rock. Their knees and everything. These guys, by the end of it, they didn't have knees in their pants anymore. The knees were blown out, and their knees were all just scabbed up and bloody. Elbows and the whole bit. So it's kind of a secret code with these old timers over there that made it back. It's just like, it's the nod.
I think putting it together for special effects is a lot of research and development, a lot of time and effort spent in developing something that the director is going to want to see. So what we have to do is we have to meet with the director, meet with the producers, see what their vision is, and try and take their vision and put it on film. What we do is all the mechanical, I guess you would say, natural things that occur in a movie, as well as wind, fire, rain, explosions, bullet hits, etc., etc. We pull these things out of the script and we put them together and try and make them all work for the movie. When I spoke with Clint originally about this picture, and Rob Lorenz, they told me that they didn't want the standard explosion in the ground with the gasoline billowing, the flame, the black smoke billowing in the air. And they said they wanted a realistic look, which was when the missiles hit the ground exploded. It didn't go in gasoline and fire, and that's what we gave them. But it took a lot of testing and a lot of time to come up with the safety factors and so on and so forth.
There's a scene where Harlan runs through a field and throws a grenade in a bunker. I got a little bit of direction where to go, and then right before we started rolling, he said, oh, and stay off the red. So I start running, and there are these huge red circles that enclosed these explosives, and we didn't know where any of them were, so we were literally dodging explosions. There was never a point where I felt in danger, but it really made you feel alive and like you were really experiencing it. Your adrenal glands just open up and you take off. It's fantastic.
There was so much going on. At one particular time, we had up to 35 effects guys on different buttons. Some guys had up to 48 different bullet hits that they were dealing with.
Gunner! Bring your rifles to fire that hill!
Okay, action. Go ahead. Pretend like you're taking pictures. And the rest of you guys are pointing.
I think the biggest issue with this particular picture is it is a period picture. And in order to bring it to life for the film, we really need to go back and look at all the research. And since this is a particular period in history, it was really necessary to spend some time researching all the various aspects of not only Iwo Jima, but also the time after Iwo Jima when the three gentlemen came back to the States, finding out what their itinerary was, where they went, how they were received in what cities, and how big the events were. And it was quite amazing to find out how big the events were for this particular war bond drive and, you know, the issues behind the war bond drive.
You know what they're calling this bond drive? The Mighty Seventh. They might have called it that we're flat fucking broke and can't even afford bullets, so we're begging for your pennies bond drive, but it didn't have quite the ring.
That'll be from the explosion, then this will go off. No problem, while you're here, and your phone goes, and you'll pitch the phone. And it's almost in one thing. Just get me another goddamn phone.
Every scene had props basically to use for the whole show. Anything that has to do with actors that they pick up, touch, hold, eat, many other things in addition to that, weapons in particular to this show. We manufactured a lot of rubber weapons when we were in the war scenes, grenades, bazookas, and all that. Newspapers were a big thing in this movie, that we had to get authentic newspapers that came out on the same day, February 25th, 1945, about the flag raising. And people don't archive newspapers, so it was a huge undertaking just to find the newspapers. I had to make license plates from every state that we were in, from every different time period, so you had the, you know, span of all those years that you had to have specific license plates for cars. They didn't change just little tags, they changed a whole license plate from year to year back in the mid-century there. So that was a big thing. And I tried as hard as I could and got pretty much, I'd say 99% of everything authentic that I could do.
Oh, cool. Pretty nice. All right, everybody out, and they go out of the car, and we go out with them. And we'll go up this way. Mm-hmm. Look at this thing here. Yeah. And go through the crowd and head out, baby.
I design a set for a certain action. Like Clint says, you have to know direction to lay out a set, you know. But he surprises me a lot of time with where he puts the camera.
And today, it's different for him as a director. I mean, he works with this little handheld viewer it's radio, it's separate. He just walks around with it. And so when he used to look at dailies, and he told me this all the time, way back when we started looking at film, the only reason he ever looked at dailies was to see what the operator did, because that's the one thing he couldn't see, where the camera was going. Because he'd have to ask the operator when he didn't have that. So did you get this, this, and this, and have to take his word. Now he can see what it is, so he hardly looks at dailies.
I just am decisive when I like something. If I have any virtue at all, it's that. When I like something, I print it and move on. If I don't like it, then I'll stay and work with it some more and figure out what's not working with it. But by and large, and when everybody's together and all of the troops, everybody knows what they're doing, and all the actors, all the men and women in the cast know exactly what they're going to do and what their participation, chances are they're going to bring to you everything, their imaginations as well.
What the hell is that? I can't figure it out. Sounds like it's coming from inside the rock.
I really shy away from doing anything technically that restrains the performance unless there's an incredibly good reason to do it. If there's some fancy shot that you need to really anchor the person down for, or you get yourself in a situation that well, it may or may not be in focus, so we better do some protection takes and this, that, and the other thing, because he likes it to be very direct for the performances, and he's of the opinion that there's a sort of an accidental spontaneity in a first take from an actor that he's very much interested in.
Being an actor first, he remembers the days of burning down takes and watching the performance kind of go away. And his philosophy for the few takes is that the first time an actor or actress delivers that line, the next 2 or 3 times, it's going to be the best.
I think you know exactly where.
I've read and heard other directors of past generations say that. They always want to see what the surprise of the first scene. Sometimes I've gotten so to the point where I'll even shoot the surprise, because sometimes it's so surprising that it's great. And you can't always get that. If you do it 20, 30 times, you can go on and on and on.
Okay, you guys, go ahead, foreground. Go ahead, do your stunt.
Action! Bunker, 100 yards on the right!
He said something to me, and he said it was sort of to everybody. We were trying to figure out how to do some shot and connect one thing to another, and we're all standing around and they're talking about it and I'm listening, and he goes, well, let's just try something, because we've come this far, let's not ruin it by thinking. You know, like, it's just a kind of a cool motto. Just let stuff occur and give it a try and let it happen, and, you know, don't ruin it by thinking.
And that's what he gave me in editing when he gave me the reins to it. He said, do yourself one favor, cut it one time, leave it alone, let's look at it. It's something we can always fix. But your first instinct here is what I'm looking for, just like with the actors.
Adam, if you could let his head sort of fall back towards us. Just on your knee, the way you had it, just without your hand.
It's not just a story of the fighting and how these people made it through a battle. It's how they were treated as heroes and how they came to grips with that.
The heart of our story is that that photograph represents to Americans then, and it represents now, a certain kind of camaraderie and work ethic to fight an overwhelming enemy. An enemy who was determined to hang on. And it was an amazing group of people.
A lot of people have not seen or know this other side of this story about these individuals that put up the flag and how they fought at Iwo. A lot of people don't know how many Marines and Japanese were killed on that island. They went for 36 days, and they fought every day. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to the rear. No. In the rear, the personnel were getting killed also. The American flag means to me freedom. Marine Corps, November 10th, 1775, that's our birthday. And it means freedom that the Marine Corps has been around that long. To protect the United States. Every time I see that flag, I'm so proud.
I fly a flag at my house every day of the year. I mean, and I look at it when I go home, and I look at it at night. And thank God I'm in the United States. Like I say, I'm 90 years old, and I wouldn't be working now if it wasn't for Clint Eastwood. I have a fantastic relationship with him, and that's why I'm still working. And I don't know, I hope I don't have to do any more. I think about the end of my line at 90 years old. But I love doing films, and I guess through the years I've worked 68 years steady. And I've never looked for a job, or never been fired. And so I've really had a remarkable career. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Jesus, Bill, here she goes. You get it?
We tried to do everything historically true as much as possible to the flag raising. I didn't know at the time whether I would be using original material, or we had to just get up there and do it, that's all. We looked at the pictures, all of them. The actors were terrific, by the way, because they were very cooperative and very and inspired about the project. And so we pointed out the night before and said, this is where you'd be, and this has got to be your guy, and this is your guy. And so everybody kind of memorized where they were.
Shooting the flag raising scene was really incredible. It felt very, very real in the moment. And the night before, we all sat in our hotel rooms and we just watched it over and over, watching exactly what our guys did. Like, I noticed that Franklin, for some reason, he puts it up and he looks down at his hand twice. Nobody has any idea why he does it, and I don't think anybody really would have noticed if you hadn't seen it like 75 or 80 times.
We raised the flag on a little mountaintop in Iceland that looked very much like the photographs that we'd seen of Mount Suribachi. And it was a long hike up to the top of this mountain, and everyone was equally exhausted as they would have been if they had traversed the mountain on Iwo. So we were winded and tired and cold, and there wasn't a lot of food brought up there, so people were hungry. And it was just one of those days that it just sort of had an electric energy to it.
For some reason, when we did it, it happened like it happened. It's just kind of what happened. Mike's hand fell right over mine. Ira's hands went up.
He's completely hidden by the men in the foreground, but you can just see his hand up there holding this young private's hand in effort to help him raise this heavy flag. And it spoke volumes to me about who he was as a leader and his character as a man.
One of the most exciting parts of it was to have the real Marines there, like Sergeant Major Deaver and Gunny Sergeant Williams, who have such an investment in their lives to telling the story, and then to actually get to act it out. It was an honor.
It's perfect to see a guy like stumble. Nothing's perfect about it. Yeah, it's great. I love
You
it.
could sense this sort of palpable energy in the crew and the rest of the cast of something very special was happening. We all hugged each other and congratulated each other after it happened, because it felt like it was something that was a long time coming in representing these men and their story.
These were just a bunch of skinny kids just come out of the Depression, and they felt somewhat complex about being called the heroes from Iwo Jima when they didn't feel heroic at all. They felt the heroes were all the men that were still out there fighting, and the men who died on the island.
John Bradley was a great man. I mean, hardworking, honest, saw things very simply, was very fair, just a decent man. One of the key aspects of Doc Bradley is he kind of was a perfectionist, and he knew the contents of his Unit 3 kits, his medical kits, inside and out, and blindfolded. He could take them apart and put them back together and knew where everything was. So even in the midst of gunfire, in the middle of a battle, he was able to tune it out and just focus, have that singular focus on what his task at hand was, which was saving someone's life or doing the best he could.
Doc is just always involved with the horrors of watching people die. Doc and Ira kind of share the similar holding of emotions. It's like we wear it on our sleeves. There's a surface that you'll always see.
Doc Bradley kind of took a father figure role, or like a big brother role towards Iggy. You know, he wanted to look after him.
Iggy! Iggy!
What actually happens to Iggy is pretty horrific, and it's something that scars Doc Bradley for the rest of his life.
Ira Hayes is just a classic war hero who doesn't know how to deal with his emotions and the horrors of war and having to bring it back to reality.
He's pretty damaged. It's safe to say suffering from a pretty heavy post-traumatic stress syndrome, although there really wasn't such a thing at the time. We didn't, it hadn't been diagnosed yet. We didn't really know what it was.
he's struggling with alcoholism and somewhere he doesn't want to be, and he's drinking to numb the pain, and he's making a jerk out of himself a lot of the time, really.
Put the goddamn chair down and let's go.
He was a born leader, and yet he just stayed in the shadows. He was one of the best soldiers in the Marine Corps, survived 3 of the bloodiest campaigns, and yet never was promoted, never wanted that sort of limelight.
Doc is someone I think who's always respected Ira and understood him maybe a little differently than everyone else in terms of seeing his sensitivities and how much the war, what kind of a toll it took on him. Watching him sort of destroy himself through alcohol and depression and all of these other things that were a part of Ira's problems.
I felt once he released the information to Harlan Block's father, it was his last secret. Now he would basically, he'd let go of living his life.
Rainey Gagnon, he's from New Hampshire. He's an only child. Apparently his mom was out pushing him in a baby carriage one morning and ran into his father with another woman pushing a baby carriage. So his dad was getting around a little apparently, and his mom left him immediately, and he was raised by his, single mom basically. She would bring him to work, and he was her little treasure. I think his mom sort of laid out a path for him. He was a bit of a ladies' man. The book puts it that a lot of the guys were a little iffy on him, but if they wanted to pick up chicks, they went with him when they were on leave because he was good at that. That's a skill. So anyway, he ends up with a woman named Pauline. The way we like to think of it is that he kind of went from one woman, his mother sort of telling him this is how it's going to be, to the next one, which was Pauline. I mean, he was 19 when this all happened to him. And to me, he was just a kid trying to make good, and do what was expected of him and asked of him. Out of the 3 guys, I think Rainey could be perceived as maybe the most fallible in some way.
Mike Strank, who's Czechoslovakian born, he emigrated to America when he was 3 years old. He was born on November 10th, which is the Marine Corps birthday. He was in Bougainville, one of the bloodier campaigns in World War II. So he was a veteran among these young men. He was only 23 years old.
The average age was only 19, so all the other guys called him the old man, and he was staff sergeant, but he got a lot of combat experience before he was finally killed.
He was the type of leader that I think inspired his men to dig deeper because of the amount that he gave in the field. And he promised them all that he would bring them home to their mothers. He died there when he was 24 years old. He was hit by an incoming mortar which came off of one of their own ships.
Harlan's from Westcote, Texas. That's where he grew up, where he went to high school, and then he enlisted right out of high school. Growing up, he kind of was the rebel in the family in the sense that they were a strong Seventh-day Adventist family. He made choices that ended up leading him to go to public school and not the Seventh-day Adventist school. He played football, which was on the Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath. So a lot of his decisions as a young man started to set him apart from his family and make him who he was eventually to become.
Harlan Block was wanting to be a duplicate of Mike Strank. Basically, it's like you're taking Superman and there's Superboy in the process. Harlan always was just trying to measure up to Mike.
Harlan was a corporal, so he was next in command. Mike wouldn't bathe barefooted. He'd wear his boots when he'd take a shower.
That makes about as much sense as you shower with your shoes on.
And so would Harlan, everything he'd do, the way he wore his helmet. And I think he saw a confidence that Mike Strank instilled in the man, and I think he wanted to be able to do the same thing.
Franklin Runyon Sousley. He's from Hilltop, Kentucky. He's 19 years old. Very fun-loving, very happy-go-lucky. provided a lot of entertainment for the rest of the guys because he was kind of a younger brother to them, I think, and they picked on him a lot. But it was all good-naturedly, and he knew that. He was just terribly gullible, which everybody else enjoyed taking advantage of.
Franklin is about the youngest and probably the least worldly of the guys in the platoon. You know, he's in awe of everything. Everything's exciting and new to him, like it is when you're 19.
He's the young runt of the litter. The guys have a lot of fun at his expense.
Ira and Franklin, the book says, was the most unlikely friendship because Franklin was very, very outgoing, very upfront, constantly joking around, while Ira was very reserved and very serious all the time. But they really hit it off for some reason. I feel a sense of responsibility to do justice to him and to his family. I think that we all feel a huge sense of responsibility because these guys are American icons and American heroes.
There were 6 guys who put up the flag in the famous photo. 3 of them were killed on Iwo Jima, you know, within a week after putting that flag up. It's one of those photographs that you know it the second somebody mentions it. It's like, when was the first time you heard about Santa Claus, or the first time you saw a picture of Elvis? Like, it's one of those images that's just there in your brain that you can't do anything about. It's like you can't even fathom when the first time you saw it was.
Yeah, it was in every newspaper that I saw as a kid. I was just a kid, but I delivered newspapers and did all that stuff. I was very familiar with that photograph.
Everyone knows the photo, but few people know the actual circumstances of the photo and the story around the photo and the reality behind the Bond tour. And it was the most successful Bond tour in American history.
The real heroes are dead on that island. We'd appreciate it if you bought bonds in honor of them. Thank you. The Mighty 7th Bond Drive, as they called it, which was really, these 3 guys were sort of the focal point of this Bond Drive. We may not have been able to keep fighting the war without it.
This bond drive where they raised $26 billion in 3 months in 1945 to finish the war in the Pacific.
I think that America was definitely fed up with the war. They didn't have the stomach for it anymore, and it was a photograph that inspired the public to dig a little deeper. You know, it represented success, freedom. You know, it represented heroism.
It's kind of almost like the birth of this celebrity, and it's making celebrities out of people who don't really feel that they are celebrities. And you put them up in front of thousands of people, Times Square completely jammed, and so you can see what it put the pressure it would put on these young men. In other words, they lived at the high end of celebritydom, and then of course as soon as the war was over, it was boom, and everything turned off, and they had to go back and just be regular guys again. That was very difficult for them.
Just wait till tonight when there's thousands of cheering people in the stands. It's lit. It'll look a hell of a lot better.
The whole Bond tour becomes a very trying experience for all 3 of the guys.
Pretend the other 3 guys are with you.
The dead guys.
It wasn't as easy to have everybody know your face back then, and yet these guys were 3 of the most famous people in America. It's fascinating to think about that, and the overnight change for them, you know, and how hard that must have been, from shooting at another human being to shaking hands and kissing babies, and what a thing to have to reconcile.
When you come from Iceland and you're doing all these horrific moments, and then you're in the Rose Bowl, standing on top of this fake mountain, me, Ryan, and Jesse looked at each other going, man, this is ridiculous that these guys had to do this. When, like last week, they're just watching their closest friends die. How they were able to do it.
It was a terribly traumatic time for them, and how shocking this transition is for them.
Mike was a hero, but I think that he'd be ashamed of me, seeing me the way I am.
Ira, you got a visitor.
So you know the deal, you've seen the picture of him. Yeah. He caught no surprise.
The story of Ira Hayes was once told in a movie years ago called The Outsider. but it was played by Tony Curtis. And though it wasn't a bad little film, we had the audacity to get a real North American Indian to play Ira Hayes. We got Adam Beach, who is terrific.
It's the first time that I ever get to represent a Native American, shown as a human being with real emotions, as opposed to playing a stereotype, you know, the stoic Indian.
You didn't serve me.
I don't make the rules. We don't serve Indians.
It's breathing. Mike, can you hear us? Mike.
The medics were always the mother hen of the unit. They always were looking out for the guys and making sure they had their bandages or were taking enough water in, or, you know, had seasick pills. Ryan picked up on that sensibility immediately, and we never went to the set medic when we had problems. We went to Ryan, and he always had everything that we needed in his medical pouches. It immediately connected us to this brotherhood and how that relationship dynamic worked in the field. You know, we didn't call each other by our Christian names. We used each other's characters' names. They called me Sergeant, and I called him Doc, and it immediately put you there.
Barry had done Saving Private Ryan, so it was like he had been through it before, and he could say to us, you know, well, this is how you should do that with your equipment. He had more experience on war movies.
He's a quite good actor and is a very hard-working guy, a diligent actor, like all these guys were. They were a terrific bunch of people, but he's probably a little bit more experienced than the others, and the guy he plays is a guy with a little bit more experience.
I just would make sure that I showed up on set a half an hour before everyone else. Sometimes I'd have all my gear on, I'd be in full wardrobe and makeup a half an hour before anyone even arrived. Just because I was playing the sergeant of these men and showing them wherever they needed to go and how to work their weapon, if they needed their boots tied, whatever needed to be done, I was there for them.
Jesse, I had seen a few things, and I liked his acting very much, and his resemblance to the real René Gagnon was kind of uncanny.
Jesse's interpretation of Rainey was the sensitivity that he brought to that character, exactly the way Rainey was, very sensitive and very introspective, and not at all sort of the typical macho soldier type, you know.
I was just a runner. That's it. I also spoke to Rainey's son a few times to try to get sort of a more personal and accurate view, you know, from the son's point of view. I felt a responsibility to portray him as, I don't want to say as accurately as I could, but at least be armed with that information, because I think there's a degree to which you should be allowed and even embrace the idea of creative license when you're trying to interpret somebody who really existed, because you're never going to be them. So you try too hard, you're just going to drive yourself crazy.
28th will land here at Green Beach. The 8th Ammo Company will land here to resupply. Suribachi's guns are the biggest problem. They can hit any point on the island.
Joe is only 19. He is the true age of those guys that were out there. Even though he was the younger of some of the other guys, his work ethic was every bit as good as the other guys.
No, I didn't hear nothing about no masturbating papers.
There are quite a few things in the script where the guys are picking on me, and those were really fun to do. Those scenes were a lot of fun, and it kind of followed us back home for a little bit.
Oh, now you're just having fun with me.
It's interesting how that relationship dynamic evolved too, because there's another opportunity for an actor to have an ego about the character he's playing and not really want to be made fun of and sort of be the brunt of jokes, but he embraced it and took on that role note for note the way this man was.
I got in shape before beginning the picture, and the thing about Harlan is he was a state-ranked football player. His entire senior class that played football, they all enlisted together. So he was in great shape before he even went to boot camp. So I thought it was pretty important to get in as good a shape as I could get in.
The movie completely honors these young Marines and the people who sacrifice so much for war, but it also says in a very unapologetic way that, you know, war is hell, first and foremost. We live in such a completely divided world now, you know, and to be reminded that there was a time only 50, 60 years ago when the entire country, half of the world, were united, you know, against a common enemy.
I would love for people to understand the hardships that those soldiers had in the war, but also understand that America as a whole can obviously come together and make a lot of change if they put their minds to it.
I feel a lot of responsibility to uphold some kind of honor for the guys that were actually there, and especially the guys that never made it home off of Iwo Jima.
To be able to explore what these guys did and what they went through is something that's kind of unfathomable to me. I mean, the sheer terror that you must experience when landing on that beach, when mortars start going off around you, machine gun fire starts cutting people down all around you.
Franklin! On Earth.
Somewhere, it will spark a conversation between a grandchild and a grandparent about that experience, and those stories will be passed on. That's where the difference can be made. Those stories will live on through the generations and will remember the effort and the lives that were lost to preserve the freedoms that we have today.
I would have been more than glad to die for this war effort, for World War II. It was so obvious what we were fighting and why we were fighting and what was at stake. I think modern wars, you know, from Korean to Vietnam on, it's been less clear what the goal is and how to achieve it. It's not quite as cut and dried as I think this war was. So the flag and what it represents and what my grandfather has fought for in this era is everything that is right and good.
With Clint in the beginning, we started by just reading the book and getting some ideas. We met together and just discussed sort of what the style might be of the filmmaking and what the style of the movie would look like. It mostly was about look and feel of the movie, emotional feel of the movie. I went around and checked out the different facilities, and Digital Domain just had a great photorealism going.
He knew we did a lot of digital water and digital terrain. We had a series of meetings with the rest of El Paso Productions, and they looked at a lot of the work we had done and made the decision that we'd be the best fit for the film.
From the beginning, this movie was going to be a very, very photorealism type drama, and the less the audience was aware that they were watching a movie, the more successful it would be, and both Clint and I completely saw that. And in that sense, the visual effects had to be completely seamless and perfect relative to the audience being completely unaware that there were any visual effects in this movie at all.
The good thing is that there was the amount of reference material available. There was such a wealth of documentation on war footage specifically. Everybody's seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures of what World War II looked like. So we knew we couldn't get away with any cheats, be it the water or the terrain that we needed to create, or the people, obviously, needed to be so photoreal.
Action!
Clint has just like all directors, they have a unique shooting style, and Clint's is very appropriate for especially this movie. And I just didn't want to interrupt that flow. He's very prepared, he's very studied, and then he wants to be very spontaneous on the set. That's sort of counterproductive to visual effects oftentimes.
He shoots like a jazz musician. He just kind of gets out onto set. You know generally what the setup is, but he decides on the spot how it's going to play out. That's kind of tricky for a big visual effects movie.
An example would be shooting in real locations instead of on a blue screen set.
Clint also felt that it sets a tone if you're working with blue screens in that type of visual effects environment, takes away a little bit from the spontaneity and the tone that is set while they're shooting.
We would have been interrupting Clint's and Tom's photographic style. It would have been a big hindrance to their maneuverability.
If something was shot on blue screen, you could very easily pull a key on it and composite it with whatever background you needed to. All of a sudden now we're going to have to do a lot of rotoscoping, which is time-consuming and very tricky in some cases.
So here we have an example of the production footage in Iceland. In this case, we're in Mount Arnafell, which is to represent Mount Suribachi at Iwo Jima. The reason for choosing to do this was that we gave Clint and the actors a great spot to be able to feel and interact as if they were on a mountain in a war zone, but obviously the background is not. So literally every single frame, somebody had to break these guys out of their foreground environment so we could add a new background to the shot. This is the final composite. Obviously, it's quite different than what Iceland looked like.
Can't stress enough about how hard this rotoscoping is. We probably spent many, many months on, like literally, just on separating the foreground out from the background for the obvious payoffs. But talk about the elements that are in the shot. Here we obviously have computer-generated water in the background. Everything is synthetic in the background, in fact, including the island. The island is part procedural 3D, like mathematics, creating the geometry, and part of it is paint touch-ups. And there's millions of little minutiae going on here, little explosions, little burning debris in the background. I mean, we even have people stepping off the ships down at the bottom that you don't even really see, but you sense activity. So an intense amount of work in the background and an intense amount of work separating the foreground from the background.
This environment also made for a very quick shoot for Clint so that he could keep moving forward without having to worry about what the background and all the actions are for the layout of a shot and how it should play out.
Go, go, go! Move it! Go, 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 go!
In trying not to be invasive into Clint's style and change what Tom and Clint are trying to accomplish, we need to know where everything is in the real world that we're photographing. We needed a way to make sure that we could fit into that world at any given moment. So we set up a bunch of marker balls on the set. They're markers that you measure the distance between them on the set so you know exactly what those are. And in the 3D space in the computer, we match those balls so that we know now we know exactly where the spatial relationships are in that given shot.
Once the material starts getting turned over to us, the integration team take the plate that was shot and create a digital environment that matches that live action plate. Some of the other teams that are involved are the lighting team, making sure that as we are rendering whatever digitally, be it the water or the tanks or the soldiers, as we put them into the scenes, they are lit in the same way, whatever lighting was on that particular day. There are some shots where you don't see it dimensionally change or you don't see it in perspective change, and so we had the ability to do large, what we call pan and tile matte paintings, which you're creating an oversized photoreal matte painting using real photographic elements and creating a large matte painting that you can then zoom in on and go to different areas and put into the background of a plate. One of the benefits of that is it takes less time to render. If you have a large 3D element in a final composite, that's going to take a long time to render and process. So matte paintings are helpful to get you through work quickly.
The physical effects that Steve Riley was doing, they were going to be the first front of trying to get it done. And because time obviously is money, their reset time is always significant, so we decided that we'd be prepared for 2 reloads. At that point, we could evaluate what we need to take care of in post.
We'd shoot 1 take or 2 takes of pyro, and that's all we're loaded for. And this is what we turned it into. Same shot. There's the before, there's the after. So what we've done is we've added a great deal of pyro because it would have taken way too long to do this on set. And we've also added suribachi in the background, and we have planes, and then we just enhance sort of the color and tonality of the shot to give it much more of a war setting rather than a sunny sort of situation.
Some of it's pretty obvious, but some of it is not. There are, of course, many more CG characters. You can see them in the background here. There's the plate version, live action people, but then we need to have people actually get hit. We didn't want them to get hit in real life. To make it a bit more scary, we got little strafing hits right on the heel of the feet, but that was a key point, is to be able to embellish the shot, but make it fit in with everything that was shot for real.
Originally, Clint, Rob, and I scouted Iwo Jima thinking we were going to film there, and or that we were going to need to do something to photograph those for backgrounds or whatever. As it turned out, that became not necessary, and we decided that we would build suribachi and everything else in the computer and make a virtual Iwo Jima. So that entire island, the mountain and everything, including the ocean and the shorelines, the sand berms, all this was modeled and manufactured in the computer.
We knew we needed to do a lot of water terrain, beaches and thousands of people on beaches, and the vehicles that were on the beaches, and the land itself. All of those things you can do development on prior to getting the material. It would have been very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do all of that character animation the traditional way. So there is a software package called Massive, which basically you create a brain, and it's a huge tree, a chain of decisions that the software considers. What this enables you to do is then take a plate of a beach, for example, that we have now created digital information for, populate it with 400 soldiers, and then just say, okay, run it and see what the software does. It's a learning process because you don't want them to be bumping into each other. There's decisions that you've given them. To make it very simple, they've got 5 options. You can also create a sound for them to react off of. So if there's a sound, they can either duck, dive down, get on one knee, or whatever variation of decisions we've created. This enables you to very quickly get through animating a large group of characters.
The only watercraft we had on the project that we used to photograph were a relative handful of landing craft. We borrowed the Iceland's Coast Guard once to put a couple of signatures in the water, but other than that, all of the watercraft are manufactured in the computer. And they do Digital Domain does a great job of just modeling and texturing and painting and lighting these myriads of ships. A lot of research goes into it to get photo accurate. It's hopefully a tasteful representation of the historic events, because one of the things, again, in looking at all the historical photographs and the style that Clint and Tom and I all agreed that this is where we're headed, is let's make it look like war footage, or war correspondent footage.
The shot that we have is a completely virtual shot. It was completely manufactured in the computer, so none of this exists in real life.
When you have a shot that's fully synthetic like this, it's always a little scary because you've got nothing to really leverage believability on. In a case like this, you've really got your pants down sort of thing. You need to make it that much better.
We started with a real island that is fully foliated, and then we had to distress it as if it was bombarded for 3 months ahead of time, which was what the case was with Iwo Jima. So you start with a fully foliated island, and now you have to sculpt it exactly to some of the details of the moment in the scene. Okay,
so this is a better example of water, but you've seen this sort of thing before, and this isn't showing the shoreline water, but what it is showing is the beginnings of aeration, the bubbles under the water that are generated by all these different landing craft. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of landing craft, and obviously you wouldn't want to do that by hand.
You've got the shoreline cut in and all the surf that's going on there. There's also what we call amplitude and sort of the frequency of the ocean and the waves and all this other stuff. All that is controlled to give you dynamics of what the ocean should look like. Again, whitewater interactive around where the ship's going to go. We've got the water bombs represented here, all synthetic. The ship starts coming in. Oftentimes in the past we would mix more of a live action, meaning we would go and photograph an explosion and then cut this in. And today it's because of the development and the accuracy of being able to create this in the computer, your lighting will be exactly the same as it should be for all the other elements. We've added a foreground aircraft cockpit. That cockpit has, a canopy, and you have to add schmutz and all kinds of stuff to it. We've added the background war sort of residue of smoke and a little more detail in some of the ships and stuff like this that are back there. So here we have the final composite of a virtual made shot completely in the computer. All the elements that went to it each contribute a little notch of further enhancement to make it more believable. Every little nuance in there you work on to make the appropriate level of believability, and you could work forever on a shot like this, but obviously there's a limit to time and money. So you stop where you feel like it's working very, very well, and in this case I think it worked well at this level.
Working with Clint is great. He believes that it's a collaborative effort and people do what they do. And within that structure, in my opinion, you're able to accomplish a great deal more. He's very good with the notion of visual effects. He leaves most of that to me, and I prefer that so I don't have to mess with his style. I can predict fairly well what his cinematic style is, and I think that's one of the great things that all the people around him do well, is they know what he's trying to accomplish.
There's just an enormous trust, and I think that's generally how Clint works. He hires good people, and they need to work hard, but he trusts them to do what they were hired to do. And I think that makes people want to do a better job. People didn't want the project to be over. They wanted to come to work every day and just create great-looking imagery.
I think in any project, you're hopefully going to get one of several things. It's either going to be a great movie, there's great work that you did, you learned something, you made some money, or you had fun. In my experience, it's rare if you get 2 or more of those. And I'm getting 5 on this one.